closer than breath. You are the air, sweeter than life. You are here. I am a wanderer. You are my peace. I am a prisoner. You are released by your grace. 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 Closer than breath, you are the air, sweeter than life. You are here, where there is strife. You are my peace, locked in my mind. You are released, closer than breath. You are the air, sweeter than life. You are here, where there is strife. You are my peace, locked in my mind. You are released, closer than breath. You are the air, sweeter than life. You are here, where there is strife. You are my peace, locked in my mind. You are released by your grace. 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 closer than breath. You are here, sweeter than life. You are here. I am a wonder. You are my peace. I am a prisoner. You are released by your grace, 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 by your
That speaker has a good voice. Good morning. Again, I will need a couple of volunteers to help clear the altar here after the service in preparation for the second service. When was the last time you heard the question, what's eating you? It's an interesting question, what's eating you? I sometimes wonder who was the first person to use that. Because most of the time, more commonly we say, what's bothering you? Or what's troubling you? When did somebody come up with what's eating you? Anyway, if a person answers that question, they usually have been in a bad mood, and that's why somebody asked them that question. But usually when they answer it, they will say or blame some person or persons, some circumstances that is causing the turmoil within them. And nothing could be more incorrect. And that happens to be part of the dilemma of our human experience, because it brings to mind the story of the two construction workers who sit down on a pallet of cinder block to have lunch. And the one construction worker opens his lunch pail, takes out a sandwich, unwraps the sandwich and then says, oh no, not again. Day after day, the same crap, the same crap. The other guy says to him, hey, why don't you just tell your wife to make you something else for lunch? The guy says, I wish I could, but I'm not married. Then the guy says, well, who makes your lunch? He says, I do. These stupid stories are carefully designed for spiritual teachers who want to anchor the point in the minds of those listening to the fact that there is no one to blame, that each of us makes his or her own lunch. And therefore, we have to begin to operate in a more expanded way, a more expanded awareness in order to heal the turmoil we feel a lot of the time. And what will help us is by listening to the masters of life. Here's Eckhart Tolle, modern day master. Can we have this on the PowerPoint, please? You can read this from his book, Stillness Speaks. Whenever you are able, have a look inside yourself to see whether you are unconsciously creating conflict between the inner and the outer, between your external circumstances at that moment, where you are, who you are with, or what you are doing, and your thoughts and feelings. Can you feel how painful it is to internally stand in opposition to what is? When you recognize this, you also realize that you are now free to give up this futile conflict, this inner state of war. Now, if you're new to the kind of teachings that come across from Eckhart Tolle, can we take this back again, please? Take a look inside yourself whenever you want to, and see if you are not unconsciously creating conflict between the inner and the outer, between your external circumstances at that moment, that is where you are, who you are with, or what you are doing at that moment, and your thoughts and feelings. Can we keep going, please? Can you feel how painful it is to internally stand in opposition to what is? When you recognize this, you also realize you are now free to give up this futile conflict, this inner state of war. So, to be sure, some people don't want to know this truth. It denies them the secondhand attention they receive from being a victim of circumstances. And so you'll run into this often with yourself if you're doing the spiritual work, or you'll run into it sometimes with other people who seek to gain some energy, some attention, by always talking about the fact that they are having this happen to them, or what's going on and happening to them. Look, it's very simple. It's this way. The path to enlightened happiness requires introspection. And that's the beginning of the truth on the spiritual journey. It's the first hurdle on the path. Are we willing to examine ourselves, to take to task our own consciousness? Because only in doing so can we come into the enlightened awareness that brings happiness, peace, love, joy to us. I remember in a particular restaurant in, I think it was Louisville, they were selling coffee cups, and one of the large cups they were selling had this written on it: how much sin can I get away with and still go to heaven? On the other side of the cup, it should have been written the word none. Because sin is the illusion-driven mind attempting to make the separation real. So we grow up being educated to try to do this. This is what the first state of consciousness is actually all about. Because that first state of consciousness is a definition of separation or duality. You know, there's me and all that I want to be happening outside myself, and all that is happening outside myself. And when there's a difference between the two, there's that stress, that conflict that takes place within, that turmoil. Now, a lot of the surface New Age attempts to make us believe that somehow or other we can use the power of our ego-centered consciousness to bring about control over circumstances and conditions. To be sure, there are some small circumstances and conditions that we can control to a certain degree. But for the most part, we cannot control conditions and circumstances, because they operate on a level of the greater awareness or the greater mind. And so it is incumbent upon us to begin to recognize that. Eckhart Tolle will say, you don't live life. Life lives you. That's coming into the oneness. I'm saying to you, great happiness awaits you if you're still stuck, if you're still hung up on the world and still trying to make all that stuff work. Listen to me. I know where I was, and I know where I came from, and I know where I am now, and I know how I got here. And it has to do with taking to task your own awareness. You've been suckered in, conditioned to an illusionary idea of life, a false definition that separates you from the conditions and circumstances in which you find yourself. Now, I'm going to run over time, and Norma's going to get me for this, because I actually threw this illustration out, but I need to use it. How many people will allow me to use it and go over time? Okay, there's most of you do. You know, they have the rhinoceros. You ever see these videos of a rhinoceros? You'll see there's a bird or two that lives on their head almost all the time. And it lives on the fleas or whatever that collect in the ears of the rhinoceros. But it is possible that that bird actually thinks he's guiding that rhinoceros to do the things he does. And so he thinks he's guiding him through the jungle and all the things that that rhinoceros does. And that's a bird brain. And we are in that same situation in the initial state of consciousness. We've been born and raised to identify with this physical body-mind self, in which we believe we are separate objective observers who have the ability to eventually control all those other conditions and circumstances of everyone else. Look at this next PowerPoint very carefully. When you look at this, you should realize the lady that penned this stuff received not a penny for it. She didn't sit down and try to figure out how to bother everybody on the planet Earth. This came from cosmic consciousness. In quietness are all things answered, and is every problem quietly resolved. In conflict there can be no answer and no resolution, for its purpose is to make no resolution possible, and to ensure no answer will be plain. A problem set in conflict has no answer, for it is seen in different ways, and what would be an answer from one ego-centered point of view is not an answer from another ego-centered point of view. You are in conflict, thus it must be clear you cannot answer anything at all, for conflict has no limited effects. Therefore, God must have given you a way of reaching to another state of mind in which the answer is already there. Such is the holy instant. Attempt to solve no problems but within the holy instant's surety, for there the problem will be answered and resolved. Can we take this back again, please? In quietness, it means in allowing the incessant thinking of the ego-centered, conditioned brain to just relax. You don't try to shut it off, just let it relax a moment. And that's the beginning way to resolve the conflicts we find ourselves in that create turmoil. For the purpose of conflict is to make no resolution possible. The ego-centered idea simply wants to be right and correct and know that it is the truth. And it tries to ensure the answer will, but to be sure, the answer will not be plain. A problem set in conflict has no answer, for it is seen in different ways, and what would be an answer from one point of view is not an answer in another light. You are in conflict, thus it must be clear you cannot answer anything at all until you transcend the illusionary concept you have of self, for conflict has no limited effects. Therefore, God, your creator and sustainer, must have given you a way of reaching to another state of mind in which the answer is already there. Such is the holy instant. Attempt to solve no problems but within the holy instant's surety, for there the problem will be answered and resolved. You can see what these kinds of teachings actually accomplish in our lives, on our path. What is a holy instant except the same instant that Eckhart Tolle is talking about? Anyone who's starting to live in the present moment is awake enough through the process and practice of meditation to live in the moment as it is no longer entering each moment with its personal self-interest preceding it and tainting everything that's taking place and wanting it to be this way or that way anymore. It simply has surrendered to the majesty of life itself. And so, you see, as we do this, as we practice this, it becomes apparent to us that myself and the circumstances around me do not rise separately. Myself and the circumstances I perceive around me do not rise separately. everything rises as one. All is one. There is only God. Now this brings consternation and concern to the initial illusion-driven idea of self. Even Oprah Winfrey, when she was discussing this kind of thing with Eckhart Tolle, became somewhat shaken by the thought that she is not creating her life, her world, as she supposes she is. She is only observing herself in the oneness and the magnificence of the thinking that is cosmic. And it is there by divine appointment, because anyone who starts in the illusionary concept of life and self and the world will only find true happiness by this grand intelligence that knows when a sparrow falls from a bough, knows exactly what it is you need in any given moment to grow into your own enlightened consciousness. That's the kind of thing that actually does take faith, and it does lead us into the practice that enlightens us. So, the holy instant cancels the war between what I inwardly want to happen outside me and what is happening outside me. Here's Eckhart Tolle himself. Can we have this video,
All we
please?
need to know is, in order to live more consciously, in order not to live in opposition to what is in the present moment, which is to live more consciously, accept this moment as if you had chosen it. And that brings in a new consciousness.
And do not deny the moment. This is what I learned from you, that literally it eliminated all stress in my life. Resisting the moment that is only going to create more anxiety and more being more upset.
A lot of the unhappiness that people experience, they believe it's due to the conditions of what's happening at this moment. But in most cases, it's not the conditions or the situation that you're in that causes the unhappiness. It's the mind telling you something about this moment that causes the unhappiness.
Yes,
So there's
like
a
I should have been
commentary.
there, I should have been
Yes.
earlier, I shouldn't have stopped to do this, I should have done that. It's the mind.
Yes. I sometimes tell people, just don't believe what I say, just try it out in your own life. Next time you get upset in a certain situation, let's say you're at the airport, many people get upset at airports. You line up at the carrying counter, it takes you a long time, and you get more and more upset, and then you observe that what is it that causes me to be irritated, angry, upset? What is it, this situation? Or is it that my mind is telling me that this should not be happening? The ego is very good at misinterpreting reality, and it believes in stories. The ego comes up with stories, often not pleasant stories about the isness of things, and it's a source of great suffering. So once you recognize that, you can experiment in your own life when you feel upset arising. Watch your mind.
Yes?
Be there, be aware of what your mind is doing. This is the most vital thing in spiritual life, is to be able to watch your mind, to be the observer of your mind, so that the mind is not controlling you.
And that is how you eliminate stress
Yes,
and suffering.
yes.
So what you just saw are two multimillionaires sitting in cheap wicker chairs out in the woods. They could have, either one of them, met at their palatial estates. But, so you see, the Course in Miracles, the Gospels, the teachings of the modern day masters are all in sync. The only thing they can do is try to inspire, cajole, teach, help others come to the wonderful awareness, the divine awareness, where we will be like Jesus when he said, I and the Father are one. Who sees me sees the Father. I always do what is pleasing to him. The Father can be interpreted as life. God can be interpreted as life. But underneath that idea, you have to withdraw what the media will try to do to you and say, well, life is chaos. It is not. It is benevolent. Life knows exactly what you need in any given moment, only you don't yet know. So it is necessary for us to wrest the ego-centered idea that seeks to control and know. This is the story in that first great parable in the book of Genesis. What was the big problem that mankind ran into? He was in the Garden of Delight, but then he was beguiled into wanting to be God, wanting to know what was right and what was wrong. This is the illusionary idea of self, that I'm an objective observer capable of knowing what is right and what is wrong and not receiving that inner subtle guidance of being in the moment, flowing with what is and not resisting life. This doesn't mean that you don't make casual plans. It doesn't mean that you don't actually take action in regards to some injustice or some importunity or some problem. That's not true. But you no longer take that move or that action with an illusionary idea of vengeance or getting even. You simply move to do that which is appropriate. And if you are doing your practice, what is appropriate will be occurring through you. And it's not some thought you just came up with to do. Here it is. Don't let it go away. That thought to take whatever action is given to you, moment to moment to moment. There is only God and God's will that you should know the truth and be free to enjoy it. So we will, once again, we're going to relax, quiet the mind. If you go too fast, I'm just going to bust you. I got a thing going here, okay? We're going to meditate together. If you don't have a particular meditation technique that you're using in which you're just relaxing, and what is happening in meditation? You're becoming more and more okay with sitting here doing nothing particular. Not striving for, grasping, wanting, fearing, just being totally okay. Right here, right now. So you can use this particular mantra to give yourself permission to be here. Everything I look upon, everything I see, is only God watching me. Everything I look upon, everything I see, is only God watching me. As we go forth from this meditation to those places we occupy in time and space, let's go forth and occupy them a little more consciously. For this opportunity in every moment to be more awake, more at peace, sharing harmony and love. Let us be thankful. And to this we say, Amen. I just found out a minute ago from Santisha that my mic was dead. The batteries in my battery pack were dead. So nobody out there heard a word I said. This is so disconcerting, I want to scream. Okay. See? Anything can happen to you when you hang your face out in public. We're going to take an offering for unity now, and I'd like it to be, good. I want this offering to be good. Because...
So you buy batteries?
Huh?
So you can buy batteries?
Right. Just before we do this, I want to say that the video following this, I would like you to try to experience it in a different way. I'd like you to try to experience it in a different way. Think to yourself that since I've gotten on the spiritual journey, it is no longer I, but it is you who raised me up. And now as we take our offerings in our hands, let's bless them with this offering statement. Divine love is my true life and my conscious destiny. Therefore, I give. Together, please. Divine love is my true life and my conscious destiny. Therefore, I give.